Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. That's my general umbrella that I use to, sort of define my show. But today we're going to be talking about astrology, and it's an interesting subject because I am the father. We're talking about twins, and I'm a father of twins. And we're going to be talking to Suzanne Keating, who is a twin herself, and she's an astrologer. So we're going to have an interesting, rambling conversation about twins. But before we do, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology as they apply to all of us in the world. And then I break it out into the individual signs, going beyond that as well. I have links in there to my podcast. I have links in there to my videos channel. And I also have links there to my Patreon site, which is a new site I've started recently, which allows you to pay me, if you so desire, which would be nice, $1 here, $1 there, doesn't matter, to be a patron of mine if you support the work I do. I certainly appreciate your work if you do your contributions if you do that, and I am grateful no matter how you look at it. So thanks for doing that if you can. So without any further ado, I was out in Chicago at the UAC, which stands for the United Astrology Congress, or Conference. I forget which it is with the C word anyway. But there I met my old friend Suzanne Keating, who lives on Nantucket, and we started talking. And I told her that I have twins, and she said, "Oh, I'm a twin." I didn't realize that about her before. So I thought one of the greatest anomalies in the world of astrology is the idea of twins, because you think about it, everything is based on birth, place, and time. And I've heard many times people say, well, supposing you're born at the same time as somebody else, is your life going to be the same? So that's kind of the premise we're going to be talking about. So without any further ado, let's get Suzanne Keating on. Suzanne, how are you today? Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Chris. Good to see you. Good to talk to you.
Good. So listen, this idea of, the whole premise of astrology is really based on birth, place, and time. So it is not hard to imagine how one would come to the conclusion that two people born at a similar time and place, especially through a similar mother, would have similar characteristics. And I have my own sort of, observations and conclusions I've come to over the years of observing my twins, who are twin boys, are now 33 years old. And I have an idea what's going on with them, and I'm curious, and you said that you were a twin as well. So we're just going to talk about the idea of twins and astrology. And I find it interesting because my twins were born early. They were supposed to be Geminis, which would have been perfectly fitting because that's the sign of the twin. But they arrived 5 weeks early, ended up being Tauruses. Now, for me, being a fire sign and Aries, the Geminis would have been an easy walk in the park for me, I think. I mean, all parenting is difficult, don't get me wrong. But it would have been easier than a couple of stubborn, stalwart Tauruses. But that's what I got, and we all get along fine. Unfortunately, I have Virgo in my rising sign, so I have at least some earth in me to help ground me, and they have also served to ground me as well. They are only 6 minutes apart, and one was born in natural vaginal delivery, and the other was born in emergency C-section.
Wow.
So that does lend something different to them right off the bat, because they had two different experiences of their birth, and of course, in that 6 minute time span, we have the difference of 2 degrees of their rising sign, their ascendant. One is 21 Sagittarius and one is 23 Sagittarius. And all their houses are the same, but in those subtle differences, we can see it quite a bit. And I'm curious what your observation is from the other side. And we'll get into this further as we go along as the conversation unwinds. But what's your experience been?
Well, I've got to tell you, Chris, something I did not understand about or remember about your twins, that they were born 21 degrees of Sagittarius. So am I and my twin. We're 21 degrees Sag, and I am 38 minutes, and she's 21 Sag 43.
Oh, so you were very close. My boys were...
We are 1 minute apart.
Yeah, mine are 6 minutes apart. Mine's 21 and 23 degrees Sagittarius. But still, within that range.
Yeah.
We're within orb, as they say.
Very interesting. So my twin and I were born 3.5 weeks early. We were supposed to be born in January of 1950. We were born in December of 1949.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we, instead of being Capricorns, we're Sagittarius.
Huh.
And it's Sag rising.
Interesting. And so, now when you look back at your life and your experience, do you see parallels? Now, I would phrase that. I'm going to caution I'm going to rephrase that. I think I see parallels in my twins for sure, especially with basic sort of primal, instinctive responses and attributes. I see that, but I know that their experiences have been different, which has colored the way their personalities have been shaped. But I do see similarities. So, where there was a time when they were living on different parts of the country and they both get their hair cut at the same time. We've heard these stories before about twins who have this certain connection. And, they oftentimes, they would do similar things or be involved with similar kinds of things at the same time, unbeknownst to each other. So I always thought that was fascinating. But as I look at them over the years, they still look a little bit different to me, even though I don't know if they're identical or not. And I know the reason I don't know that is because my wife had always wanted to do a DNA test on them to determine if they were, because there is a chance that they could not be simply by virtue of what's called placenta twin. There's a phenomenon where they share the same sac but actually have different DNA. She knew much more about it than I did, and she's no longer with us, so I can't ask her. But it was interesting because I wonder, because of the nature of their birth, one was born vaginally and one was born C-section. And the reason he was born C-section was because the cord was prolapsed around his neck. So it was very quickly emergency. Their face is very similar, but also very different because of coming through. One came through the birth canal and one didn't.
Oh, wow.
So if you saw them side by side, you'd say, well, they could be twins, but you might almost say they were fraternal twins. But I don't believe they are. I believe that they are identical because when they were younger, they were very hard to tell apart. At least, we had certain things we could always tell. I mean, if you're the mother of a twin, I'm the father of a twin. I could always tell who was who, and I could tell who was coughing. I mean, I could tell even from a different room. I could say that sounds like Ryan coughing, and that sounds like Ben coughing. I could always tell. But the difference is, and so think about it from, like just the idea of somebody being born at the same time as you. You would think that based on the logic of astrology, I'm curious what your thoughts are about this. That people would be similar.
Yeah.
Now, do you find that with your sister?
I do. I think that the way I look at it is we have the same roadmap. We were born with the same birth chart, basically. There's very little distinction except that her nodes mine are in the 4th and 10th house, just inside the cusp. Hers are in the 9th and the 3rd. And that's the node. So I find that a little interesting. Don't know what that means, but I do think that we start out in the same place, but we have choices. And I do think that free will is a big part in the choices that twins make, or anybody born at very close in time in the same hospital, say, on the same day.
Right.
They're not twins, but we're identical twins. We look exactly alike. We often have similar experiences even when living apart. Like, for instance, she was in Hawaii and sent our mother a birthday card on Mother's Day. I was in New Hampshire at UNH and sent my mother the same exact card.
Wow, that's the story that makes sense for twins.
Yeah. We would do the same, we'd show up at a baby shower, and my niece, which is my twin's daughter, would open the gift from me, and then she'd look at her mother, and her mother would go, "You don't have to open mine; it's the same one."
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So we do weird things like that, and yet we have really different opinions on things sometimes. And we make very different choices sometimes. And I think that all has to do with where we're at, or life situations.
Circumstances play a lot. They play a lot. Yeah, because at any point in time, people will be infused with a sense of an impression based on circumstances that they had when they were younger. Based on the school playground or the bullies or whatever you happen. They're going to have different life experiences that are going to shape the way that they feel and are emotional. Both of my sons tend to be a little high-strung sometimes. They they have a sort of a very short. They've got Uranus on the ascendant as well. They've got a very sort of electric kind of personality where they speak quite quickly sometimes and are quick to rush to judgment sometimes. And I've noticed that in both of them. But what I would say in my observation is that I think that they both have many of the same attributes and the same potential is there. But oftentimes I think what happens with twins is that the potential, like anything, and astrology is a dualistic sort of science, in that dualism, one could go one direction and one could go the exact opposite, but yet still carry a certain methodology of acting out in those different realms of the world because they have certain characteristics that are the same. But it's like one might be in one circumstance and one might be in another circumstance by choice, and yet how they approach that circumstance has similarities. Does that make sense to you?
Totally, because, and I think it even happens at different points in our lives. So at one point, my sister may choose to do something completely different that I'm not, it might be along the lines of something, let's say, we're both interested in, and she'll take one approach and start studying something, and I'm going in the opposite direction. Or for instance, I went to college, she went and she traveled. She left Nantucket, she went to Hawaii and got married. So she did the Sagittarian travel, while I did the Sagittarian college.
Exactly. And that's what I was just going to say. They both fit into the same thing. But there you go. Yeah, and it's under the same house structure, so to speak. It's what Sagittarians do. They love adventure. They travel. They adventure, and of course, education is another way of augmenting that travel desire.
And later on in life, so shortly thereafter, she had her first child. When she had already had 3 children, 3 daughters, she went back to school. She went to college. And I got pregnant with my 3rd child when she was in school. But she was pregnant when she left for Hawaii, unbeknownst to all of us.
Interesting.
So that was an interesting thing.
So, these lives that live in peril, I mean, it does pose an interesting question for astrologers because in theory, you should be able to find this out. What I have observed over the years is that it comes down to the character traits are there. Like, if we look at, I know you've probably heard there's similar people, some people have born on the same birthday at the same time, the same year, and they become completely opposite. They may not be twins, famous people who were born at the same time. And yet you may see a certain drive in one direction or the other based on, what they're talking about. And it's just one of the, based on sort of the way that they enter into the world and the way that they work around the world or move through the world are similar. Sort of their likes and dislikes, even their personal mannerisms, their sort of if they're a slow-moving person, if they're a quick-thinking person, if they're, a chatty person versus a quiet person. Some of those characteristics, I think, remain through each twin. Yet, as we mentioned earlier, it's how they are manifested based on their own unique world. Now, we know that there's come a point in time when the twins are going to go separate ways. I'm not sure when you guys separated, but, probably when you were in high school, you didn't want to be a novelty, so you sort of probably took opposite sides of the room or walked down different sides of the aisle, of the corridors. I'm not sure, but I know that twins, and when I was growing up, would often try to be, do their best to sort of distinguish themselves from the other. They didn't see the novelty or the interest in what they were, what they were representing to the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, wanting to have our own identity. Yeah,
right. And very difficult.
And really working hard to do that at different points.
Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to do that. I mean, if you are, if you've got somebody who looks like you, and you think about it from a psychological standpoint, what could be more difficult to overcome than the spectrum of somebody who's your doppelganger who's right next to you, looking exactly the same as you and perhaps getting confused with you. Now, when my boys were younger, people confused them all the time because they looked so similar, even though we dressed them differently. We went out of our way to dress them differently. But there's that whole concept of, I can't think of a relationship that would be more complex to try to wrestle through than that of being a twin.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I find, there's different points in your life. You go, well, wait, why was I born with a twin? Mm-hmm. And when I look at the charts and I look astrologically and I see our nodes, the North Node in my chart is in Aries. I came in to learn how to be an individual, to be singular. And the South Node is in Libra. We come from a past of, the connections and relationship. Right. So that alone I find very interesting.
Yeah, it really is pretty phenomenal. I mean, it makes you wonder how what the differences are and what would be, so unique. Now, in my case, the boys, it looks like there's the only degree that really is off in any of their charts is that one ascendant. Everything else looks exactly the same. All the planets are exactly the same as they would because the slow-moving ones. Even the moon is the same. The only thing that's really different is their part of fortune, which is sort of an unusual thing. But that's, of course, is best. That's the reason for that is that's based on the mathematical calculations of using the ascendant. So that makes sense there. But everything else is exactly the same. They've got a 20-degree Leo moon. They've got the Sagittarius rising, and they got the Taurus sun. And there's no variation in their houses. Even in that 6 minutes, there's no variation in the houses. So they all fall in the same place. And yet, they married very similar women in some respects. Not exactly, they didn't marry twins, obviously, but, excuse me, they married women who had similar circumstances and had a certain demeanor to them. They actually both married women who were Leos, as I thought was interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Now, it's funny. Julie and I didn't do the same in marriage so much, but we did. We went through a divorce at the same time. Oh. And we were going to a family outing, and she hadn't shared that information with me, nor I with her. And on the way there, she said, well, I guess I better tell you that, my husband and I are getting a divorce. And I said, oh, so am I. Steve and I are getting a divorce. And, so timing-wise, certain situations are coming up and presenting themselves at the same time in the life. Not always, and not always that big of a deal. There must have been some aspect. I bet if I went back to that day, I'd find, something was aspecting our Uranus in our seventh house. We both have, Uranus in the seventh house, and the closest aspect is an opposition to Mercury. In our first house.
Yeah, that would make sense. So that would be, there would be a sense of tension there.
Yeah. And one thing she said to me one time is maybe, do you ever think with Uranus in the seventh house like that, we weren't supposed to be married? And I said, no, that's not the way I look at it. I said, but the sense of, having family and could be very different and unique from other people. And, I don't want to say easy come, easy go. I don't mean that at all. But it could also be that it's something you could adapt to maybe quicker than someone else. I don't know.
Or it might. I think it might indicate a sense of disruption, perhaps. Just that sort of Uranian uncertainty is always there. A sense of perhaps rebellion is also indicated by the Uranian quality. I wouldn't necessarily say, I think having Uranus in the seventh house would indicate perhaps unusual relationships, unusual pairings, perhaps which are somewhat unconventional. But who's to know who's to say what's a conventional relationship? I suppose that's the defining quality. You really don't know that.
Right. Now, do you find any similarities or differences in the firstborn twin versus the secondborn twin?
Well, I do, and there's some reasons behind that. I think the firstborn twin was actually smaller than the secondborn twin, and it came to find out that the second twin was taking more of the food in the womb than the first child was, and because they were born early. My first twin was only 3 pounds 15 ounces, and they both went into neonatal intensive care unit, and the smaller twin actually thrived first and was able to get released from the hospital sooner than the second twin, who was actually larger. But the second twin, of course, don't forget, had the whole the cord prolapsing, and which of course can be very can be, if it goes on long, that can be a very dangerous situation. I mean, that's where some cerebral palsy, I think, comes from that situation, and a number of other diseases can come from that, or at least primarily because you're not getting oxygen to the brain and stuff like that. But this was very quick. As a matter of fact, I was in the operating room when this was happening, and they threw me out after my first son was born because they said, get the father out of here. This is an emergency C-section. So they had to rush me out. I didn't even know until 2 hours later what the story was with my wife or my second son. So I was...
Did you know she was having twins?
Yeah, we knew that. We got that early on. But and that was funny, too. We were doing the ultrasound, and the doctor says, wow, here's the baby's head, here's the baby's legs. And then, whoops, the baby just flipped over. And I said, no, wait a minute. That's not what's going on. There's twins in here. And it was very exciting at the time. Little did I know what I was in for, but it was very intriguing at the time. I remember thinking, wow, this is going to be such a unique experience to be able to watch this and observe this, because I was into astrology at the time, and they said, wow, this is going to be fantastic to be able to have my own little laboratory here of how people respond and how they operate differently. I think that when they were younger, I noticed a lot more in the way of similarities, especially with, like I said, certain kind of physical motions, the way they ate, the way they laughed, sort of the way they would run even. I'd see similarities there. They both played soccer, and they were great with each other because they just fed off each other perfectly. They would pass the ball back and forth and just get goals all the time. But that's where I noticed it most, was in that area. Then I think as they matured and got older and sort of went their separate ways, they became more... I think they made a concerted effort to be more unique. And, of course, situations in their lives became much different as a result of what they had gone through, losing their mother when they were young. And I think that obviously had a different impact on each of them. And, then they separated them for a while because they needed some, specific help in certain areas. And they chose different routes. One went to something called the AmeriCorps, which was a very good program for like the Domestic Peace Corps. And he came out feeling much better about himself than the other one who went a different pathway. And I have my sister's husband was married before she was, and he adopted a pair of twins back in the 1960s, and they still look identical, but these twins could not be further removed. They grew up, I think they're only 4 minutes apart, and they were adopted. And one is a fine, upstanding, sort of normal person with a job and a wife and a child. And the other one is a complete, just devil-may-care kind of person, just drifting through life with no sense of foundation or substance. And so they really are quite different.
Very interesting. Was there anything that happened to him young that would have, indicated that they might go in opposite direction?
I don't know. I don't know if it's just the sheer virtue. I mean, I wonder. This is the sort of the existential question I pose to a twin: is if you have a twin and one is more dominant, do you then do everything in your power to be the opposite of that one? Or just so you have your own identity? And what extremes do you go to establish your own identity? What extremes did you go to establish your identity? I mean, did you color your hair differently? Did you wear different clothes? Did you, all that?
That's so interesting because we were, unlike you, your boys, you didn't dress them alike. My mother in the 50s dressed us alike.
Right.
And as we grew older and even into junior high school, she's buying us the same outfits. So in high school, we really wanted to establish our own identity. And I probably did more active in the community in high school, became a cheerleader, did things. Julie became more of the recluse kind of reader, pulled back, was a little more, she liked having the identity of being sort of a poetical kind of a hermit or something. I'm not sure how to...
Do you think that the decisions were chosen by you or by her?
Did we make those decisions?
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. I never thought that I wanted to be different necessarily. I think she's number two, and I think she always wanted to be different. And she's the one who would push against being the sameness, and still does to this day. But I just like being myself, and I don't think I ever really thought that being a twin held me back. Right. But I think from her point of view, she's number two, and she tries harder to be different.
Yeah. And so, like, I wonder, like, did you decide to become a cheerleader first, and then she decided to become the opposite of you?
No. She actually was in high school. She was doing a lot of sedentary, solitary things, and part of it was based on health. She had a health condition that I didn't develop, which was she had, oh God, I can't remember what they call it now, but it's something with her heart.
Okay.
And she had to be really careful and not somewhere between 6th grade and 8th grade. And she couldn't do certain things like at camp that I could do. She couldn't ride a bike, and she had to be more careful. So I was a little more active. She was more sedentary.
So there's a choice. There's something that sort of tilted the scales in some way, because there was an outside event or condition that changed her outlook on life. Now, I had something very similar happen to my sons. The second twin, who was born with the cord prolapsed around his neck, developed, he was about 10 months old, and if anybody's listening and doesn't believe in baby monitors, I guarantee you they are the best thing in the world. He had 2 ear infections one night, and we checked on him before we went to bed and gave him Tylenol and everything else, and he was good. His temperature was down and was manageable. But then my wife woke up in the middle of the night and heard this chirping noise through the baby monitor. We went into the room, and he was having a seizure because his temperature had gone so high so quickly. He was at 101 and went to 105. So we had to rush him to the hospital in the middle of the night. So I went with my son to the hospital. My wife stayed behind with my other son. I rushed off to the hospital, and in that time, he was rushing to the hospital, and they pumped him full of something to stop the seizures, and in that time he had gone to a code blue, and of course they revived him very quickly. So those have got to have had an impact on him and his outlook on life. And I have to say that he is a little more, what's the word I want, a little more serious than the one who didn't go through that. With good reason. With good reason. I mean, he looks at life probably much differently, as if it's just not fair. And I think that's part of the thing, is that I've always strove with them to say, listen, you may be twins, but you're not always going to be fair. Life is not going to be fair. One of them married a woman whose parents helped them get a house. He married a woman who's not going to get that help. So that's just the way it goes. And you do make choices, like you said. Some of the choices you make are very much in line with that. And I think the real test will be to see how they become as they become parents themselves, and how they cope with, how to deal with children and sort of their styles and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Did your sons, as they got older, like in high school and college or whatever they did after high school, did they go in similar directions, or did they take different paths?
Well, they took different paths, but ironically, one works in the hardware business and one works as a chef. So both of those are Taurus kinds of, they're earthbound kind of, occupations. They both love to cook. They both have a very strong hobby in that regard. So I find that to be a similarity. But one's far more mechanically inclined. One plays guitar and one doesn't play guitar. So, but, it's just, there's just sort of these weird anomalies that I can't quite figure out. And it's more just an observational sort of quandary, because we look at these people and we say, well, the logic of astrology. But then again, I was talking to somebody the other day, I think it was Michael Earlywine, and he said, even if a baby is born a second after the other, they are still on a different groove on the record, so to speak. They're just, it's just a different time and place.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear that Michael thinks that. I heard him speak twice at UAC, and I really enjoyed everything that he had to say.
Oh, he's a brilliant man, yeah.
He's very brilliant. One of the things I asked one time, Bernadette Brady, I had the fortune to have a reading with her years ago, and I said, what do you see when you do twins charts? Have you done very many? And she said, actually, I've done quite a few. And she said, I asked her, how do you see the differences in twins that are identical and born so close together? And what she said to me is, often there'll be something in the charts that will play out. One twin will play out one of the major things, like you're both Sag rising, and the other will play out something else, like the Moon, Mars, and Saturn all in Virgo. Huh. And we've done that at different points in our life, where one is more in learning, teaching, building some skills, and the other is kind of going off and having an adventure. And we've switched places in that regard.
Huh.
But she said that what basically the overall picture, she felt that one twin might play out more the Virgo stellium and the other the Sag rising part, and I can see that.
Right. So there would be a tendency to go towards, especially with the stellium, you might begin to manifest more of that in times, and they may very well do that at different times. But when you were younger, probably your mother would know best. But do you remember what it was like when you were in your 5, 6, 7, 8 years old? I mean, you were still just the twins, and you were probably referred to as the twins, right?
I do remember that, and we were called the twins.
Yeah.
Yeah, and living on a small island, people knew us growing up. Even grown up, some people couldn't tell us apart. They'd just say, "Oh, hi, twin."
Yeah, that's terrible.
You know.
And what did that do to you? How did you feel about that?
Well, it was like, wait, I have a name, and here's my name. I probably at 5 or 6 didn't think about it so much, but later on, I'd say, "Yeah, my name's Suzanne." And people say, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. What's your relationship like today? Do you feel like you still feel a twin bond there?
Okay, so this is a tough question. I'm going to be a little cautious about what I say because we're not in a good place right now. My twin is.
I don't want to press you then if you don't want to.
So, but for purposes of talking about this, we have very similar ideas about a lot of things. We often still do things around the same time, but there's been a glitch where she's not happy with a choice that I made, and so she's not speaking to me currently.
Oh, I see. Well, that could also be, the again, coming back to the idea of trying to find your own identity. And if your own identity means you must be counter to somebody, then that sort of makes sense in a way.
Well, I kind of think that's what was happening because I lived off island for a number of years. And when I moved home, people were calling my twin by my name. And she does not like that. And so because I moved home and I took away this 10-year freedom she had, and then all of a sudden I'm back, and I think that might play into a little bit. So, if I see someone smiling at me in the grocery store and I don't know them, I say, maybe you know my sister. Yeah. And they say, oh, who are you? And I'd say, I'm her sister. Are you guys twins? Yeah, we are. Wow. It's funny living in a small town.
No, I can imagine. It sounds really unusual. I mean, I can just imagine. We're talking today with Suzanne Keating. We're talking about the subject of astrology and twins. Her website, her blog is pathwaysofthesoul.blogspot.com. That's Pathways of the Soul, one long strung together word, .blogspot.com. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll continue our discussion about twins, so hang in there. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name's Chris Flisher. My guest today is Suzanne Keating. She's an astrologer who lives out in Nantucket. Lucky her. And her website is Pathways of the Soul. Pathways of the Soul is one long word, .blogspot.com. It's a blog, but she's working on a website, which will soon be up when she gets to it. And we're talking about twins. Suzanne has the view as an astrologer and as a real twin. I have the view as an astrologer and the father of twins. So we're sort of comparing notes and mulling over the idea of what it's like to be born at the same time and how that looks. Now, several years ago, this is an interesting story, I was at a festival with a friend of mine. It was a Cajun festival, and we were under this gigantic tent, and there was a bunch of people dancing, and I happened to spot a woman in the middle of the crowd who was not with anybody, so I jumped on the stage and started dancing with her just out of pure fun, right? And when I got off the stage, I brought her aside, we started talking and cooling down and stuff like that, and I asked her about her birth information eventually in the conversation. It turns out she was born at the exact same time, in the exact same place, on the exact same day as my sister, my older sister, which means to me, I thought that was a very synchronistic moment, by the way,
Wow.
because to meet somebody who was born in the same hospital at 9 o'clock in Providence, Rhode Island, on June 12th in 1946, there was this person born at the same time as my sister, which means that my mother and father were in the hospital at the same time that this person was being born. Now,
Wow.
I got to know her pretty well, and she ended up, opening up some doors for me, and I went on a television show with her and did a few interviews and stuff like that, which was all great. And I sort of fallen, I've lost contact with her, but I thought that was an interesting thing because by virtue of meeting her and by virtue of knowing all that was going on, she was a chance encounter of the highest order, but yet she opened many doors for me. I ended up being on many television shows down in Rhode Island and radio shows as a result of her, and it was just a fascinating experience. That never would have come my way had I not spotted her. The bigger question is, why did I pick her? Who knows? That may be synchronicity or just
Right.
divine intervention.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
And she really was born in the same hospital the same day as your sister.
Yeah, I verified everything twice over to be sure.
Wow.
I got birth certificates, I got the whole thing because that was just unusual thing. Now, why would I'm not especially close to my sister? I get along with her fine, but I mean, she's 6 years older than me. We live in different parts of the world, so I don't see her that much. But growing up, we were fairly close, and it just makes me wonder why would I have picked on? I mean, there was 300 people on the floor dancing. I don't know why I would have picked this one person. But it was an unusual thing.
That's very interesting. In some way, she might have acted as an older sister for you with the help she gave you getting on these shows and things.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah, and so that must have been placed before me in some way, and I made a prize of it and happened. I actually have a lot of synchronistic events that have happened to me in my life, which are inexplicable, other than the fact that they are just the way it's supposed to be, which I think is the way to look at it.
Right. I don't believe in synchronicity. I don't think synchronicity happens, but I don't believe there's any accidents. I think
I don't either. Yeah.
that they're there for a reason, and when they pop up, it's like we never would have known going down the road in the morning that we were going to run into so-and-so on the dance stage and she was going to be born the same day as my sister, that kind of thing.
That thing is just when the events are so unusually connected, and yet there they are, and they're right spot on. Like when you get a chart with the degrees are perfect, that things are popping in that chart,
right?
And it kind of gives you that impression. But when I think about so obviously much of what anybody their personalities are going to be formed on will be based on sort of as we grow as children, and I can say this as a singleton, we and people in generally form their impressions of what life is about and what their boundaries are based on observation. So, as a child, you would see this in your own children. They would base their reactions on how you react, because that's what everything is a mirror effect in relationships, and everything is relationship anyway. So if your child fell off the swing at the playground, started crying, they saw you running over and to provide comfort, they'd say, "Oh, this is what happens when I fall off the swing," or "This is what happens," and so they learn how to respond based on stimuli they receive by observing their parents. That's typically the way it works in psychology. But with twins, they form their mirrors of each other. And so their whole view of the world is much different than that of a single person because they are comparing with each other. Now, did you guys have your own separate language when you were growing up?
I don't know if we had our own language, but we used to. This is a really weird thing we used to do. We'd go over to my aunt and uncle's and sleep over, and we'd talk to each other in our sleep. We were sound asleep. And we'd be sleeping in the same room, and my uncle walked in one time. He said to say, girls, you shut the lights out and go to bed. But when he opened the door, the lights were out. We were each in our own bed, and we're talking to each other. And we're making a plan to go next door and visit his married daughter.
Oh, interesting.
And he was just freaked out by it.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So we'd do little things like that, but we didn't have a language. We were able to kind of think, communicate without having to talk. You know, like we knew what the other one was going to say, that kind of thing, and we can still do that when we're around each other. And she'll say something that'll strike me funny, and at times when we shouldn't be laughing. My grandfather's funeral, and the priest is going up and down with the rosary and the Hail Marys full of grace, and one started to giggle, and the other, that's it, we're off and running. Yeah, we can't contain it because
especially at a time like that, it's so difficult.
Oh, I know.
Don't you wish you could can that kind of laughter and use it later at a time?
I know.
It's always so funny. I did the same thing. I was always in trouble in church because I was always laughing. Terrible thing to do. My father was a minister, which made it even worse. So.
Oh no.
But thinking back on this, when you look, I think that the relationship between the twins is just incredible. The dynamic there. But I also understand the desire to be independent so clearly. No one wants to be considered to be part of somebody else. It diminishes you in some way. It removes your individuality.
Right. Yep. I feel strongly that my individuality, I'm pretty comfortable with who I am. I don't feel like I'm stuck in being a twin. I don't feel like it hinders me anymore. But that might be because I've reached a certain age that I'm not, I've matured and I've grown on my own. But it's when you're young and you're a teenager or even thereafter, and you're still trying to establish your own identity, you don't want to be thought of as one of the twins.
No, it's diminishing. It says you're a watered down version of a whole person in some ways. It gives that impression when it's referred to that way.
And especially if you have an opinion on something that's different from your siblings. And people think that just because the one thinks this way about something, you're going to agree. That is amazing to me, that people think that we can't have our own separate ways of looking at things.
I know, and that must have been really much. Were you in classes together when you were younger?
Oh, God, yes, we were. There weren't so many separate classes growing up, and we were always in the same class until maybe high school. And, the teachers would confuse us sometimes, but they'd usually sit us on different sides of the room so they could tell us apart. Mm-hmm. And, and it was like almost being lumped together as one individual, but then being separate so they could account for the two of you. Right. But it didn't seem to really always matter which one you were.
Right.
As long as you answered roll call. Right. I remember getting my sister being sick, and I was at her desk in the morning to get her books. And because I was at her desk, the teacher was taking attendance and said, "Julie's here, Suzanne's sick. Suzanne's out." And I said, "No, I'm Suzanne." And she said, "That's not funny," And so I couldn't, once someone's made up their mind, that's it. So I had to be Julie all day.
Oh, that's terrible. That is funny. I can only imagine what that's like. And there you have to shed. You have to relinquish your personality and your identity, and it just doesn't seem fair in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's even as an adult, I think that's part of the problem right now with my sister and I, because she doesn't want to be mistaken for me. Right. I don't care if someone mistakes me because I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin, but it's just an odd thing. It's very odd when people look at you and they think you're somebody else, and then if they persist in that realm and don't give you your own cognizance for being who you are, then that's that's something I don't dwell on it very long, because, if people don't get it, they don't get it. And it's not my problem. Frankly, I just don't worry about it. But the idea with kids, with little kids, with twins, I always, when I meet twins, now where I work, there are twin girls who come into the store where I work. I've been struggling for 4 years to tell them apart. And just when I think I've got it knocked, they'll say something, and I'll say, "Oh no, you're the other one," and they laugh. They think it's funny, but they know I'm a twin, and they know I'm trying, so they put up with me.
Yeah. Have you ever had conversations with other twins, now that you mentioned that, who are of your age and share similar experiences as yours?
Oh, I have, yeah. And I always, for years, I was saving twin birth times and to do studies on twins. And to tell you the truth, I can't find it right now. I think it's in my old computer. I didn't transfer everything over. But I've talked to twins, especially about birth order. First twin, second twin. Are you a first or are you a second? And the overwhelming, whether it's male or female, overwhelmingly, I've been told by the second twin that they always felt they had to try harder than the first twin to be themselves, or to gain access, or whatever it is. The second twin always felt at some disadvantage to the first twin.
Interesting. And that's just that's just part of that probably just comes through their DNA, or some sort of a strain of their personality. They can just tell that's there, I guess. I mean, it does pose a problem for parents too, because you've got to act and respond in double time all the time.
Right.
It's always a problem.
Yeah.
There was a National Geographic that came out, I don't know, probably about it actually was April of this year. And on the front cover, there are twin sisters, and one is black and one is white.
I saw that.
Yeah, and that is a fascinating observation of what nature has provided and what this must be like. Now they are obviously going to have their own identity, because they've got their their skin color to tell them apart. But they are twins born at the same time, and it's phenomenal.
Well, haven't you met twins? I know twins that are 4 months younger than my sister and I, that are fraternal. They don't look anything alike. You wouldn't even know they were sisters.
Right.
One is fair complected, blondish hair. The other's and tall, and the other one is shorter with dark hair. And you would not know they were siblings.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. Yeah.
Unless you knew the parents, because one takes after the mother and the other takes after the father.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Such a disparity in the two different people, just like the egg split, and one is just a different factory almost. I mean, that's
in fraternal twins, the egg doesn't split.
Right.
Fraternal twins are born each their own egg.
Their own egg, right. And so I'm saying that
and it's identical twins with the egg splits.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have this, and it's only the women. Only women are responsible for this. As much as men might try to claim victory for this, they can't. They just, and it is a genetic. Fraternal twins are genetic, whereas identical twins can basically happen to anybody, I guess, is what I've been told.
Yes, it's just a freak of nature. I mean, it just happens. The egg just splits. I know fraternal twins are generational, and often they run every other generation in families. I do know a family here on the island that had 2 sets of twins, and they're fraternal, and they were born like 2 years apart. They had twins 1 year, and then 2 years later, they had another set of twins.
Wow, that's interesting, huh?
Yeah.
It's just amazing. The whole concept is it's a fascinating one to me, because of not only because it's close to home, but because it's something I just observe through the eyes of an astrologer. There's things that you would say, well, in the purest form, but then you'd have to argue, well, everybody's unique no matter what, because their experiences and their DNA is going to be unique. But when you have two people coming from the same DNA strain, they look the same. It just opens to questions like, how does this work?
Well, I think there's a bigger question we haven't even touched on, and that's, and my sister posed it to me once 38 years ago or so. I wonder why we chose to come into this life together. And I said, whoa, wait, what? And she said, she was reading Edgar Cayce, and she was looking into the whole lifetimes and all the growth and everything. So I started studying all this. I took up astrology. I became a certified past life regression therapist. I've done a lot of things, rebirthing, and anything that came down the pike, I'd do it. And then I'd go to my sister and report back. And one day I had gone to a conference, not a conference, but a talk by a woman who could access the Akashic records. And she was talking about lifetimes and all that. And so when it came to the Q&A, I said, what do you think about twins being born in the Akashic records and how that relates to past lives? And she said, oh, she went right away. She asked me my twin's name and my name, and she went into this place and went to her Akashic records and came back and told me a lifetime that we had together, which was one that I didn't know about. I'm aware of at least 6 of them, but she... So she lived my sister was living in Western Mass at the time, and I called her and I said, listen, we got to go see this woman to answer the question that you asked me. And she said, what question is that? I said, why we chose to be born into this lifetime together. And she goes, oh, well, I don't have the money for that. I said, I'm paying. Let's go. Let's just do it. And so I arranged it, made that, get my boat lined up to go off island, because everything you go to when you live on an island is a big deal. If the weather's going, if the boat's going. Mm-hmm. So day before, I said, 2:30, here's the address. She said, oh, we're not doing it. And it never happened. She didn't want to do it. And so but even without that, and that was probably a good... maybe 18, 20 years ago. But I've just gone on with my own study of it, and I just feel like the deeper issue is, what are the karmic things that you've got to resolve? Or what are the things that you shared together that was so great that you wanted to share them again? I think there's a much deeper spiritual connection with twins. I really do.
I know, and I'm wondering, you've got me thinking about that, because I wonder how that would work. I mean, you'd sort of, what would be the rationale that you were, well, we don't know. What's your experience as a past life regression therapist say about that?
That people often will have unfinished business with someone, so they'll choose to come in. So I don't know how the mechanics of it work coming into the lifetime together. Right. But some of it are unresolved issues of being competitive, and then a really competitive lifetime, either where the parents pitted the two. I'm familiar with a lifetime where the father would only allow one twin to study music, and the other twin had to pick another subject. They couldn't both study music, and he picked. He didn't let the girls decide. He picked, and so the one who wanted to study music was not the one who got to study music. And so they had to be born again in order for her to resolve that. And, those kind of things are very interesting. And
so there's a sort of a cosmic balancing act that had to go on, a cosmic, sort of a correction.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And I'm aware in my experiences of my own past lifetimes, and they haven't all been with my sister, but in the ones that I'm aware of where they have, sometimes we were working together very well, and other times we were pitted against one another because we were siblings. Mm-hmm. In some lifetimes, we weren't twins, we were partners, like a male-female, mm-hmm. and, and even back to Mongolia, both very strong male leaders of a tribe, but and fighting with the Chinese, and then our whole village of men getting blown up by the Chinese and killed, and we were killed because we lost our guys and we died suddenly.
Wow, interesting. So so people who have been through maybe a tragic experience together, like maybe they were aboard the Titanic or something like that, may come back to finish up something that was started, like you mentioned, some sort of a traumatic historical event that they shared, but as different people, now they come back as twins to sort of perhaps resolve that.
Yes, yeah.
It's just amazing stuff. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed by some of the stuff that goes on with the twins. When my twins first went to kindergarten, They were together a week, and then they had to be separated. Fortunately, we lived in a town that had they had 2 kindergartens at the time. But the teacher said, they're both great kids, but they cannot be in the same room together, and they had to be separated, and which I thought was funny at the time. It makes perfect sense. And then as they grew and grew older, they would. What I found unusual was that most of their friends, almost all of their friends, were singletons. In other words, they were children who came from families where only one child was the product of the parents.
Oh, and so they didn't have brothers and sisters.
They didn't at the time. They had they had a younger brother when they were about 7. They had a younger brother, or 6 rather, who was my youngest son. And we did that to sort of balance the whole show out. I was afraid actually of having the set of twins because I'd been through a lot with them. But so as a result, many of their friends, they had 4 close friends all going through elementary school. And each of these children were the only child of the family. So these kids who were singles never had any brothers or sisters. They were just single kids. So they had 2 parents and 1 child. We know, at least I know from my experience, that children who grow up in that kind of environment grow up much different. They have a different sense of perspective. They seem more entitled. They're probably more mature. Anyway, but my sons latched onto these single kids. I thought it was phenomenal. Why would they have, the kids have 5 friends, 6 friends, but 4 of them were single kids. And the younger twin would always side with the guest who came over. So the guest would come over, the kid would come over for a play date or whatever, and Ryan, my younger son, would always latch on to the other kid and sort of take over the friendship and then gang up on his twin brother. And then once the kid had gone home to his parents, he'd be back in shape with his brother again. But I thought it was odd that he would.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So that must have been a way of them trying to establish his own identity in that regard.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it could be. I know. I don't remember. We were the oldest of a very large family. In 11 months after we were born, my brother Michael was born. So my mother had Irish triplets.
Oh gosh,
3 children under a year old.
Yeah, of course.
And that's brutal. And then so we had built-in playmates and other babies to take care of, and we grew up taking care of the younger kids. And we didn't really get to have our own individual friends very much. We'd just at school, but we didn't have too many play dates and things.
Right.
Friends from the neighborhood could come over for pizza night or something when my mother made dough for pizza, and or whatever was going on. But we didn't really establish our own friendships until I'd say high school.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, my boys always established these odd friendships with this single. I'm not sure if they shared the friend or whatever, but it is unusual. One thing that's good about twins, I will say, is that they were able to entertain themselves a lot of the time when they were younger, which was a real relief to me. They both had asthma because of the fact that they were born early. And so I, back then, quit my job in 1986 to stay home with them for 3 years because my wife had a much better job than I did at the time. And I stayed home with them because the doctor said they could not go to daycare because they would catch pneumonia. And I remember having times where, one of them would catch pneumonia. We'd drive them into the hospital, and no sooner would I I'd drop my wife off with the one, and she'd stay overnight with him in the hospital. I'd be driving home. By the time I got home, the second twin would have the same problem. I'd have to turn around, go back to the hospital. And there was times when she was on the 6th floor with one child, I was on the 7th floor with the other child, and we'd switch every other day or so. And it was just you can't make this stuff up, and yet, and then as they got older and bigger, and because they were small, it was sort of like the kind of asthma you get from not finishing your gestation period and being born early. The lungs are the last thing to develop. As they were going through that process, they developed asthma. So eventually, as their bronchial tubes got larger, they grew out of it, and they're healthy and did everything everybody else could do. But during that time, they had this similar condition, and it's. One has it worse than the other. Now, one does still have a little bit of an allergy to, certain things. So that might indicate, I'm not sure what that indicates. Does that indicate, should I go ahead and do the DNA test after all? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's the only way I could really establish that. If you've never wanted to trust that out with yourself, you know that you guys are identical.
Right. I mean, actually, I don't think any tests were ever done. We were just told, and we look identical, we sound identical, we have the similar laugh, everything.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we're identical.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you are. But your mother could probably tell you apart by your voice and your laugh.
My mother could. My father could. My father always knew the difference. I couldn't even fool him even when I was older and I was living off island, and I'd come home to visit in the middle of a snowstorm, and I'd show up to see him when he was in the assisted living place, and he'd say, "What are you doing here from Vermont in the middle of a storm?" I said, "I just came to see you, Dad." And I'd say, "How do you know it wasn't Julie?" He goes, You know I've always been able to tell you two apart.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think the parents always will be able to tell. There's no question about it. I can always tell.
Yeah.
Well, it does pose an interesting question about twins in general and astrology. I know that Stephen Forrest has done some work with twins, I think, if I recall, and I'd love to know what he has to say about it. But I wanted to talk to you about it because I know that your experience as a twin and my experience as a father of twins, we would have some commonality. We'd see some traits there. But I think ultimately what we would take away from it is that basic physical characteristics and attributes and even characteristics, sort of personality, not personality so much, but sort of what you call physical attributes, like, the way you comb your hair, the way you walk, the way you brush your teeth. I find those similarities to be very real and clear. What I don't see to be clear is choices and personality based on circumstances that happen to them after the fact. And that makes sense because one child may wake up at a friend's house, and another child may wake up somebody else, or they may go to different schools, have different opinions, have different girlfriends, and then life begins to develop differently.
Right.
But they still do have those certain characteristics that still remain the same.
The similarities, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
And I'll find that my sister, I'll go to my other sister and her husband's house for dinner, and she'll say, "Have you seen your sister lately?" And I'll say, "No, why?" And she goes, "Because she cut her hair just the same way as you just cut yours."
Oh, that's the sort of stuff that you expect, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's been twins who've been separated at birth who ended up living very similar lives. And then there's also a lot more people had twins than they realized, because one of the twins would die at birth. Elvis Presley was a twin, and yet that sort of haunted him. I've been to Graceland. There's a grave there for his twin brother who died in childbirth.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
I've had clients, astrological clients, who have told me that they were. Some will say, I had one woman say, "I was supposed to be a twin." And I said, "What do you mean supposed to be?" And she said, "Well, my twin died in utero."
Right.
And, as a stillborn. Or one that was, and then someone else who was, she felt like she was searching for her other part her whole life.
Yeah, you sort of sense of emptiness, a sort of an empty well. Like, it's kind of like having a phantom limb. You'd always want to know where it was. It's kind of unusual in that regard. Well, anyway, we've run out of time here, Suzanne, but I want to thank you very much for coming on. My guest today has been Suzanne Keating. She's an astrologer. Her website is pathwaysofthesoul.blogspot.com. Pathways of the Soul is one long word, .blogspot.com. You can find her work there. She also is on Facebook. You can follow her there as well. And I'd love to continue the conversation sometime, but I need more data, I think, in order to come up with some conclusions about twins. But just wanted to get the conversation started because I thought it was fascinating, and I do appreciate you coming on today to talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you asking me, too. We are having a good discussion in UAC. It was great fun, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, it's great to have you on, Suzanne. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.